The Book of Enoch says the Garden of Eden still exists, and describes where Enoch found it. Genesis does not say the Garden of Eden was destroyed. Read it again carefully. Genesis 3:24 says God placed cherubim and a flaming sword at the eastern entrance to guard it. Not to end it, to guard it. The garden was not removed from creation, it was sealed off from access. And in a text the church removed from your Bible in 364 CE, a man named Enoch says he found it. Not symbolically. Not in the middle of a dream sequence the way apocalyptic writers frame their visions. He writes in first-person past tense, the same grammatical structure a journalist uses when filing a report from the field. He walked through the mountains. He noted the terrain. He recorded the trees, the stone, the temperature, the direction of the water, the position of the gate. He stood close enough to smell the fragrance of what grows there. And the angel beside him told him he was not permitted to touch anything. Not yet. That is what the text says. Not yet. The text has been sitting in sealed archives for 17 centuries. It sat in Ethiopian cedar boxes in a church no outsider has accessed for 400 years. It surfaced in limestone caves above the Dead Sea in 1,947 inches. 11 separate copies, more than were found of Deuteronomy, more than Exodus. It was read, flagged as dangerous, and restricted from public theological discourse by councils who called it irreconcilable with canonical scripture. What they meant was that it was too specific. It named a place. Places can be verified. If forbidden biblical history is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, hit subscribe. Every week this channel goes straight to the primary texts, the manuscript archives, and the archaeological field reports that never make it into the mainstream conversation. Now, let us go back to what Enoch actually wrote. The primary source material for Enoch's journey to the garden comes from two distinct manuscript traditions that have never contradicted each other on the geographical specifics. The first is the Gaze Corpus, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, manuscripts that have not left that building in over 400 years. The second is the Dead Sea Scrolls, recovered in 1947 at Qumran, where 11 separate copies of Enoch surfaced. Fragment 4Q, 203. Catalogued at the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, contains Aramaic text from Enoch's journey chapters dated to around 150 BCE. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard scholarly English edition, identified the journey section as containing geographical language structurally inconsistent with symbolic or apocalyptic writing. Compass directions, terrain features, distance indicators, temperature observations, botanical descriptions, the kind of language a surveyor uses. Knibb noted this style appears nowhere else in ancient Jewish texts on heavenly journeys. The typical apocalyptic journey uses vague cardinal directions and symbolic geography. Enoch names features. He compares textures. He records angles. He says how far. The journey to the garden spans chapters 24 through 32 of the Book of Enoch, which belongs to the oldest section of the text called the Book of the Watchers. This is not the parabolic, later composed section. The Dead Sea fragments confirm this core text predates the Common Era by at least 150 years, and likely far longer given the linguistic evidence embedded in the Aramaic. Enoch begins his account in chapter 24 by describing being taken to a mountain. Not a named mountain in the theological sense of Sinai or Moriah. A described mountain. He records that it was made of precious stones, that it had a throne on its peak appearing to be built from crystal with a canopy of ice above it, and that no one sat there. He then looks east and north and sees 7 mountains surpassing all he had seen before. The 7th was highest, shaped like the seat of God, with fragrant trees encircling it. He is not in Jerusalem. He is not in a vision of the temple. He is standing somewhere on land, describing topography visible from where he stands. Chapter 24, verse 3 records his conversation with the archangel Michael. Enoch asks what the fragrant tree is, the one that resembles nothing else he has encountered. Michael tells him it is the tree of life. No mortal is permitted to touch it until the great judgment. After the judgment, it will be given to the righteous and transplanted to the holy place near the house of God. But for now, it is here, in the ground, alive, growing, still bearing fruit. No living human is authorized to pick. This is not a description of something destroyed. It describes something preserved and actively guarded. The 7-mountain configuration Enoch describes in chapters 24 through 26 has generated more academic argument than almost any other passage in the text. The description is too precise for allegory and too strange for any known Middle Eastern geography. The mountains are arranged so that 3 to the east form a group, 3 to the west form a group, and the 7th stands at the center and highest point. Enoch describes the eastern three as having peaks of colored stone that change appearance in different light, one resembling pearl, one resembling antimony, one resembling red crystal. He records deep ravines between them and that no person goes there. The western three are lower, separated by gullies from which fire ascends continuously. The central seventh mountain is of a hardness exceeding all stone he has encountered, surrounded by fragrant trees unlike anything growing in the east. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the 1983 Oxford translation directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts, noted in correspondence archived at the University of Manchester that the color descriptors for the eastern peaks in the G's text are precise mineral terminology, not poetic language. The word rendered as pearl is a specific gaze term for nacre crystal. The word rendered antimony is a mineral coloring reference. Someone who wrote this passage was describing what they observed, choosing the closest material analog from trade goods and familiar substances. The fires ascending from the western gullies drew attention from R.H. Charles in his 1906 translation. He noted their resemblance to descriptions in chapters 17 through 19, where Enoch observes pillars of fire falling downward without end, beneath the ocean. Those pillars match what oceanographers would later identify as hydrothermal vents, superheated water columns erupting from volcanic fractures in the ocean floor. The language in chapter 24 mirrors it, fires ascending from below through deep gullies. Geological activity. Chapter 26 is where Enoch walks further and sees what he describes as a blessed place. The J's term in the Axum manuscript is one doctor. Isaac translated as a place of provision, not a spiritual category but a functional one. A place where everything needed is present and continuously supplied. Enoch records a river flowing to the east, then dividing. The water is cold and sweet. Trees of fragrant wood produce fruit unlike any he has eaten, their smell reaching him from a distance. Chapter 29 extends the botanical inventory. Trees producing resin, trees with leaves that do not fall in any season, trees flowering in every period without cycle. The gaze uses language doctor, Isaac and later translators have noted carries connotations of something operating outside normal seasonal time, not subject to the biological rhythms governing every plant Enoch had ever seen before arriving there. He is describing an ecosystem that operates on different rules. Chapter 31 adds something standard English translations consistently underemphasize. Enoch describes being shown the tree from which the primordial error came, the tree given to Adam and Eve before the expulsion. He records standing in front of it. It is still there. The text is not framing this as a memory or a symbol. Enoch writes in the same first-person past tense he uses for every other observation on this journey. He stood there. He looked at it. The angel confirmed what it was. Genesis never said the tree was cut down. The flaming sword was at the gate, not at the tree. Fragment 4. Q203 in Vault 7b, at the Israel Museum, preserves Aramaic text from the journey chapters, with one notable variation scholars have discussed in limited academic contexts. The Aramaic uses a directional phrase for the garden's position relative to the seven mountains that the gaze renders slightly differently. In the Ge'ez, the garden is to the east of the mountains. In the Aramaic fragment, the directional marker translates more precisely as beyond the mountains, to the place where morning comes first. This is not a theological metaphor. The phrase is a navigational one in Aramaic geography. It means the further east beyond the highland barrier. The two manuscript traditions, Aramaic from the Dead Sea and Ge'ez from Ethiopia, 2,000 miles apart and 1,700 years of separate transmission, agree that the garden is on the eastern side of a specific highland feature. They differ only slightly on how to express the directional relationship. That kind of agreement between independent manuscript lines on geographical detail is exactly the cross-referencing Nib identified when he called the journey chapters structurally inconsistent with symbolic literature. Symbolic literature does not generate independent geographical corroboration. Survey reports do. Genesis chapter 2 is where the garden's geography gets more specific than almost any sermon about it ever acknowledges. Verses 10 through 14 describe 4 rivers flowing from the garden. The Pishon flowing around the land of Havilah where there is gold, the Gihon flowing around the whole land of Cush, the Hiddekel, east of Assyria, identified by scholars as the Tigris, and the Euphrates. 2 of those rivers are still running today, originating in the highlands of eastern Anatolia. The text says the garden is the source of all 4. Geologists studying pre-flood topography have noted that during the Holocene optimum, approximately 9,000 years ago, river systems in the Mesopotamian and Anatolian highland region were significantly more extensive. Paleo-channel data from satellite surveys using synthetic aperture radar to image buried riverbeds shows branching patterns across the eastern Arabian Peninsula and the Tigris-Euphrates headwater region, consistent with a much larger watershed than anything visible on modern maps. The highland source region, from which all 4 Genesis rivers could plausibly have originated, sits in the area Enoch's directional markers for the 7 mountains point toward. The highland arc running from the Caucasus through eastern Anatolia and south into the Zagros Range. The oldest known human settlement sites cluster here. Göbekli Tepe, the oldest structured ritual site on Earth at approximately 11,600 years old, sits in this exact region. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried by its builders. They covered the carved stone pillars with infill and sealed the complex. The structures beneath the surface are more complex than the excavated sections. The site predates writing, pottery, and agriculture by thousands of years, and the carved imagery includes figures whose proportions do not match the human anatomical standard. The Book of Enoch does not exist in textual isolation. The Anzu fragment, a clay tablet excavated from beneath a flood layer in Mesopotamia and held at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, contains a Sumerian account bearing structural parallels to Enoch's journey chapters that cannot be explained by direct textual borrowing. Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin spent 6 years reconstructing the Anzu fragment's full text from high-resolution photographs of the original rubbing. In her 2021 working translation, she noted that the tablet describes a boundary between the world of the living and a preserved region. The author calls the Abzu Key. The standard Sumerian Abzu is the subterranean ocean beneath the world, associated with the god Enki. But the Anzu fragment's Abzu Key uses the compound differently. Ki means earth in the locative sense, the surface. Voss translates Abzuki as the deep place on earth, a region of the surface world that retains properties of the primordial deep, not underground. On the surface, hidden from normal access, intact. The Anzu fragment predates the commonly studied Gilgamesh tablets. Its script is a synthesis of writing forms that by conventional chronology were not simultaneously in use. Marta Halab, who first cross-referenced the Anzu text against the Proto-Sumerian corpus in the early 1990s, wrote in a monograph circulated privately to 11 colleagues that the tablet was either composed by someone who had access to all those written traditions at once, or it pointed to a problem in the chronological framework itself. Her monograph was never published. In 1993, she left academic life. Both the Anzu fragment and Enoch's journey chapters describe a place with waters emerging from below rather than falling from above. Both describe a region surrounded by natural geographical barriers, and both describe it as sealed from ordinary access following a specific event. The terminology differs, the cultural framing differs, but the structure of what they are pointing at is the same: a place on earth, sealed, still present, still intact. The Egyptian textual tradition does not use the name Eden, but the concept of a preserved original terrain, accessible only under specific conditions, appears in the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead in a form scholars have treated as purely theological cosmography. The field of Iaru, the Egyptian field of reeds, is described in funerary texts as a place where grain grows taller than any grain on earth, where water flows in channels that never run dry, where every tree bears fruit in every season. That last detail, trees bearing fruit in every season without cycle, appears in Enoch's botanical inventory of the garden in chapters 29 through 31, not similar language. The same functional observation stated as a defining characteristic. In both traditions, the trees of the preserved region do not follow seasonal time. The limestone block stored at the Cairo Museum under catalog number JE89289, recovered from beneath the pre-dynastic layer at Saqqara and sealed for an estimated 4,000 years before Jean-Philippe Lauer's team found it in 1971, contains carved imagery labeled with a compound glyph, requiring a term absent from standard Middle Kingdom usage. The inscription describes those depicted as beings present before the counting of years. Before the First Dynasty, before organized human civilization established the calendar systems used to record its own history. The Scan Pyramids Consortium survey in 2018 by teams from French and Japanese universities identified at least 3 sealed subsurface chambers beneath the pre-dynastic complex at Saqqara in dimensions inconsistent with known dynastic architectural features. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities classified those chambers as structurally sensitive. Excavation permits have not been issued. The full radar dataset has not been released. The assessment has been pending since 2018. What those chambers contain sits in the same category of deferred answer as the manuscripts in Axum and the fragment in Vault 7b. The Council of Laodicea's decision in 364 CE to remove Enoch from the biblical canon is well documented. The stated reason was that the text contained too much detail about fallen angels. But the council records show a second concern in Canon 60, which prohibits texts that name the angels held in punishment and describe the places of their binding. The same logic applied to the garden passages. Specific places invite investigation. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, did not dismiss the cosmology, he dismissed the specificity. He wrote that Enoch makes claims about the locations of things that should not be locatable. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410 CE, argued the garden should be understood as existing in a spiritual register inaccessible to physical investigation. He cited this against writers who had taken Enoch's geographical description as a literal survey. But Enoch says otherwise. He uses compass directions, he describes stones, he records temperatures, he smells the trees. R.H. Charles, whose 1906 English edition remains the most widely cited popular translation of Enoch, condensed passages in chapters 24 through 32 that the Gay's source manuscript contains in full. Dr. Isaac's 1983 Oxford translation directly from the Ethiopian text is more complete. The differences are not dramatic in terms of theological content. They are significant in terms of geographical specificity. Charles's edition reads as general. Isaac's reads as a field report. Same chapters. One translator preserved the specificity. The other softened it. The Ethiopian church kept Enoch in its canon. When James Bruce brought 3 Gay's manuscripts to Europe in 1773, the journey chapters attracted immediate controversy. Oxford scholars called the garden passage irreconcilable with Mosaic cosmology. Charles added a footnote suggesting the 7 mountains were probably a garbled memory of a specific ridge formation in the Levant. He offered no coordinates. He had no explanation. He offered one anyway. The Anzu fragment describes 9 observable changes in the natural world that preceded the event the author calls the day the upper deep opened. The Sumerian compound Vos renders this way. An Abzu-Bala does not appear in any other known tablet, and is sky. Abzu is the primordial deep. Bala means to turn over, to invert, to open from below upward. The sky does not open from above. It opens from beneath. Those 9 signs include water rising without rain, birds flying against the season, lights appearing without corresponding celestial sources, the ground softening without moisture, sound moving through earth without vibration, the color of standing water changing, animals abandoning territories without predator pressure, a change in the smell of the air, and a change in the sky's appearance at the borders of the horizon. 8 of those conditions are documented in peer-reviewed geophysical and ecological literature from the past 2 decades. The 9th corresponds to atmospheric optics anomalies associated with weakened geomagnetic fields. The European Space Agency's SWARM mission, launched in 2013, has tracked the growth of what researchers call the South Atlantic Anomaly, a region of severely weakened magnetic shielding, stretching from southern Africa across to South America. The anomaly is splitting into 2 lobes, a development not expected at this stage. Satellites passing through it experience unexplained electronic failures at 3 times the baseline rate. In 2023, satellite operators logged a 300% increase in unexplained system failures compared to the previous decade's baseline. Not debris strikes, not predictable solar events, failures without traceable physical origin. The tablet says the 9th sign marks the point at which the sequence can no longer be turned. 8 of the 9 signs are in the geological and observational record. The 9th is present tense, active, growing. The Anzu fragment describes 2 kinds of motion in the Earth. Its daily rotation and a second slower rotation governing the position of the pole star over a much longer period. This is the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year cycle. Hipparchus of Nicaea is credited with discovering precession in 127 BCE. The Anzu fragment predates that discovery by 2,000 to 3,000 years and describes the mechanism with enough accuracy that Voss used the star positions in the text to calculate backward and confirm the tablets. Age independently of radiocarbon dating. The tablet also names a precise celestial conjunction tied to the event's timing. Venus, Mars, and the Moon must align within 1 degree of a specific star in the constellation the Babylonians later called Mushusu, the dragon, positioned in what modern astronomy maps as Draco. That three-body conjunction within 1 degree of a single point in Draco occurs by Voss's calculation once every 4,700 years. The previous occurrence was approximately 2,900 BCE. The next occurs in March 2029. The alignment lasts 6 hours and 14 minutes. The tablet specifies the configuration with enough precision that Voss was able to pinpoint it to the 14th of March 2029, beginning at 1922 UTC. A text written 5,000 years ago named an astronomical event accurate to the hour. The tablet does not say the conjunction causes the opening. It says the conjunction is the moment the opening that has already been developing becomes complete. The way a crack in a wall does not fail when the crack forms, but when the last material holding the two sides together finally separates. The 9 signs are not warnings. They are the process of the opening moving through its stages. What the Anzu fragment says about the Abzu key, and what Enoch says about the garden guarded by a flaming sword at its eastern gate, converge on the same structural conclusion. The seal is not permanent. The boundary is not a wall. It is a condition maintained by forces the text described from different cultural angles. When those forces reach a specific threshold, for a specific window of time, the boundary becomes crossable. The author of the Anzu fragment sealed the tablet inside a chamber in Mesopotamia in approximately 2900 BCE. The flood deposit above the chamber is dated by 3 independent radiocarbon analyses to that same period. The author did not come out. They waited for what they knew was coming above them, and left the tablet on the floor for whoever would be alive when the processional clock completed its next turn, and the 9 signs appeared again in sequence. The tablet's final sentence is carved in symbols large and deeply pressed, showing none of the compression damage affecting the lower sections. Voss translates it as, "You already know what this is. You have seen the signs. The only question left is what you will do in the 3 days while the boundary is open." The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum holds manuscripts that have not left that building in over 400 years. Fragment 4, Q, 203, sits in Vault 7B at the Israel Museum. The Anzu fragment is at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. Its lower 30% still only partially resolved from Voss's photographic reconstruction. The chambers beneath Saqqara, identified by the 2018 Scan Pyramids Radar Survey, remain sealed. Excavation permits have not been issued. Every line of primary text describing the garden in geographical terms, Enoch's survey report in chapters 24 through 32, Genesis's 4 river coordinates, the Anzu fragment's boundary description, the Egyptian field of reeds with its seasonless trees, points to the same conclusion. The garden was not unmade, it was sealed. And in the text the council voted out of your Bible in 364 CE. A man named Enoch walked those grounds, recorded what the trees looked like, noted where the water flowed, stood in front of the tree that changed everything for humanity, and was told by the archangel beside him that he could not touch what grew there. Not yet. The manuscripts are still in their boxes. The chambers are still sealed. The fragment is still in its vault. 8 of the 9 signs are now in the past. The 9th is still forming at the edges of the sky. And whatever the boundary is protecting, it has been protected since the sword was placed at the eastern gate, waiting for the conditions the Anzu fragment's author described in 2900 BCE, and that Enoch recorded in his first-person survey east of the 7 mountains.